Okay, class, let us now discuss the kinds of obligations. So, under the Civil Code, there are primary classifications and secondary classifications. Okay, class. The primary classifications are the main classifications under the Civil Code. Ang secondary, medyo hindi masyado siya mabigat. Anyway, let us focus on these primary classifications. Pure and conditional obligations, number 1. Number 2, obligations with a period. Number 3, alternative and facultative obligations. Joint and solidary obligations, that's number 4. Number 5 is divisible and indivisible obligations. Number 6 is obligations with a penal clause. And here are the secondary classifications. The unilateral and bilateral obligations. Okay. Unilateral class, kung isa lang ang may obligation sa parties. Bilateral if both parties have their own respective obligations. Real and personal obligations, discuss na natin ito. Real obligations, yung obligation na to give. A personal obligation is obligation to do and not to do. Determinate and generic obligations. Okay. Ito yung obligation na determinate and generic yung thing. Civil and natural obligations, na-discuss na rin natin ito. Civil obligations are those obligations referred to in the Civil Code. And natural obligations, sabi natin, is that obligation not to recover something that you have done or you have given if the obligation is already prescribed. So, hindi na pwede bawiin. Yun yung natural obligation. Legal, conventional, and penal obligations. Legal class obligation is na-discuss na rin natin to. If it is required by law. Conventional obligations, conventional class, convention meaning agreement by the parties. Convention, conventional. Okay. Penal obligations, yung mga obligations mo if you commit a crime. Okay. So, ano yun siya sa culpa criminal at saka sa delicts. So, let us first discuss pure obligation. What is a pure obligation? Pure obligation is one which is not subject to any condition or no specific date is mentioned for its fulfillment and is therefore demandable at once. So, walang condition, walang due date, so pure lang siya na obligation. Ibig sabihin, you can demand it at once. Okay? Pwede na kaagad sabihan ng debtor na, oh, debtor, you have to fulfill your obligation now. Example, D obliges himself to pay C 1,000. Okay? So the obligation here is immediately demandable because there is no condition. There is no date mentioned for its fulfillment. So in this example, okay, C can now demand that D give him the 1,000 pesos. So that is a pure obligation. Conditional obligation, okay, is one whose consequences are subject to the fulfillment of a condition. So this time may condition na. Okay, what is a condition? Take note of the definition class ha. A condition is a future or uncertain event or past event unknown to the parties, the happening of which will give rise to or extinguish an obligation. Take note class, dalawa klase ang condition dito na sinasabi, yung future and uncertain event. Future yon na hindi sigurado na event. Or it is a past, nakaraan siya but unknown to the parties. Okay? And then the happening of the condition may either give rise to the obligation or extinguish an obligation. So, two principal kinds of condition, suspensive and resolutory. Unahin natin ang suspensive class. Suspensive is also called condition precedent. Pre means before, or condition antecedent meaning ante means before. So, pareha lang yan sila. Synonymous. So, if the suspensive condition is fulfilled, the obligation arises. Okay. Sa umpisa class, wala pang obligation, pero pagka nangyari yung condition, magkakaroon na ng obligation. Example, D obliges himself to give C 1,000 if C will graduate this year. So if you look at the example, si D wala pang obligation. Okay? And then the condition is, kapag si C will graduate this year. And because the condition is has not yet happened, okay, D is not yet liable to pay the 1,000. Ibig sabihin, suspended yung obligation niya because of the condition na hindi pa nangyayari. That's why it's called the suspensive condition. Kapag hindi pa nangyari ang obligation, ang condition, the obligation will be suspended. So, suspended lang siya until such time na mangyari yung condition. So, the condition shall be deemed fulfilled when the debtor voluntarily prevents its fulfillment. Ibig sabihin nito, for example, dito sa ating example, D obliges himself to give C 1,000 if C will graduate this year. So, ang ginawa ni D, halimbawa, ginawa ni D para hindi makagraduate si C, sinunod niya yung school need C. Para hindi siya maka-enroll, walang klase, hindi siya makagraduate. Ibig sabihin, si D, hindi magiging liable to pay 1,000 kasi hindi makagraduate si C. And that is the case, class, because D prevents the fulfillment of the condition. The law says the condition is deemed fulfilled. Okay? So, ganito, class, is i-discourage kasi ng batas na si debtor is nagawa ng hindi mabuti para lang hindi ma-fulfill yung condition. So, sabi ng batas, if the debtor will prevent the fulfillment of the condition, then it is presumed, it is deemed that the condition has already happened, and therefore D will still be liable to C, the creditor. So, in an obligation to give, once the condition has been fulfilled, its effects will retroact to the day of the constitution of the obligation. This is because the condition is only an accidental element of the contract. Okay? The fruits, however, will belong to the debtor unless otherwise intended by the parties. Okay? Halimbawa, class, bigyan natin example na naman. Si D, nag-oblige siya to give C isang kambing kapag ka nag-graduate si C. Nag-graduate si C, kunwari, nag-graduate si C. Then, the effect of the promise, the effect of the promise is babalik siya doon sa time na nag-promise si D. Okay? Because yung condition kasi nag-suspend lang sa obligation. Pero yung effect ng pagka-fulfill ng obligation will retroact to the day of the promise. And therefore, D is actually liable since the day na nag-promise siya. Halimbawa, nanganak ang kambing habang naghihintay ng graduation ni C, yung kambing, kay debtor yun. Exception ito sa rule nung una natin diniscuss that the fruit will be part of the thing na i-deliver. Okay? Kapag may suspensive condition, class, during the pendency of the condition, any fruits will belong to the debtor, not to the creditor. Even if at the time of the fulfillment of the suspensive condition, mag-retroact siya to the day of the promise. Okay? So, in this case, may special sa na rule na yung fruits, hindi yung automatic na mabibigay kay creditor. Unless napag-agreehan ng parties na kasama yung fruits. But if the problem is silent, hindi kasama yung fruits. Okay? Suspensive condition pa rin. During the pendency of the suspensive condition, class, these rules will apply sa obligation to give a specific thing. Okay. Applicable lang ito sa specific thing. Okay? Halimbawa, nag-promise at the beginning of the year, nag-promise ka to give something to a creditor na ang condition mo is will happen, wala pa nangyari, pending pa. So, the specific thing, dapat alagaan mo yon, kaya lang minsan nawawala, loss. Loss means the thing will perish, nawala, or goes out of commerce, or disappears. Nawala. Goes out of commerce class, ibig sabihin, binawal na, hindi na pwede. So it may be considered as loss. Okay? So ano mangyayari if wala pa nangyari yung condition, tapos nawala yung thing? Specific thing, I mean. Okay? If my fault ang debtor, may culpa, the obligation is, or no. If the debtor has no fault, without fault, walang culpa, the obligation is extinguished. Okay? So, kasi walang kasalanan si debtor. So, kapag ka nangyari ng condition, wala nang obligation si debtor dahil the thing was lost without the fault of the debtor. Halimbawa, may fault, may culpa. Then, si debtor, dahil wala yung thing, is liable to the creditor for damages in the event that the suspensive condition will be fulfilled. So, aside from loss class, sometimes, ma-deteriorate lang yung thing. Okay, mag-depreciate lang yung thing. Mag-deteriorate. Okay. During the pendency of the suspensive condition, habang hindi pa nangyari ang condition, yung specific thing, pwede rin mag-deteriorate. Okay, ano mangyari? If without culpa, without the fault of the debtor, the creditor will bear the impairment. Ibig sabihin, tanggapin yun ni creditor ang kasali na yung deterioration kasi hindi naman kasalanan ng debtor. Okay, natural lang siya na nag-deteriorate or nag-depreciate. But, if it is with the fault of the debtor, okay, the creditor may choose between, kapag nangyari na yung suspensive condition, okay, the creditor may choose between rescission or cancel na lang, or fulfill pa rin but with payment for damages. Okay, during the pendency of the suspensive condition, pwede rin maging ma-improve or mag-appreciate yung thing, specific thing. Okay, ano mangyari sa improvement? Of course, the improvement will be for the benefit of the creditor if the suspensive condition will be fulfilled. Okay, yung improvement, matuturn over yun kay creditor kapag nangyari yung condition. If the thing is improved at the expense of the debtor, habang hinawakan ni debtor, nagkaroon siya ng expense to improve the thing, then he shall have no other right than granted to usufructuary. Sabi ng batas, para siyang yung usufructuary. Okay? Ang root word nitong usufructuary class is use, actually use. Okay. So, ang usufructuary class is ganito. Ginagamit mo yung isang bagay for free, then you are a usufructuary because it is owned by another. Ginamit mo lang for your own benefit for free. So, kung may ginastos ka doon sa thing na yun para ma-improve siya at your expense, para magamit mo siya ng maayos, then hindi mo na siya pwede singilin doon sa nagpahiram sa iyo. Okay? Yun ang usufructuary. So, if the thing daw is improved during the pendency of the suspensive condition, tapos nagkaroon ng necessary expenses sa debtor para ma-improve yung thing, then, at the time na mangyari yung suspensive condition, then, hindi pwede kolektahin ni debtor si creditor for the expense because it's just considered a usufructuary during the pendency of the suspensive condition. So, at any rate, kapag na-improve yung thing, okay, matuturn over pati yung improvement doon kay creditor without him paying for any expenses na na-incur ni debtor for the improvement of the thing. Suspensive condition pa rin, in an obligation to give, the debtor can recover what has been paid by mistake before the fulfillment of the suspensive condition. Okay? Binigay niya na, obligation to give, binigay niya na, wala pa nangyari ng suspensive condition, pwede niya bawiin because of the principle under quasi-contract, the quasi-contract of solutio indebiti. Okay, delivery by mistake. Pwede pa rin bawiin habang wala pa nangyari yung suspensive condition. Okay, this time, resolutory condition naman. Ang resolutory condition, kabaliktaran ito ng suspensive. It is called a condition subsequent. Kasi yung suspensive condition kanina, antecedent and precedent yun. This time, resolutory condition is a condition subsequent. Okay, afterwards. If the resolutory condition is fulfilled, the obligation is extinguished. Okay? Kung ang suspensive condition class, magiging suspended yung obligation until such time na mangyari yung condition, kabaliktaran nito si resolutory condition. Si resolutory condition, pagka-promise mo, may obligation ka na. And then yung obligation mo will be extinguished, mawawala, if the condition will be fulfilled. Okay? In this case, the obligation is demandable at once. Parang pure obligation. I-take note ka sa dalawa na yung demandable at once natin. Tanungin ko sa board exam, ano yung mga the obligations that are demandable at once? Number 1, yung pure obligation. Number 2, a conditional obligation that is subject to a resolutory condition. Dalawa na yun. Madagdagan pa yun mamaya. Example, D obliges himself to give C 1,000 a month until C will graduate. Ano ibig sabihin? From now on, D promises to give C 1,000 a month habang hindi pa mag-graduate si C. Ibig sabihin, demandable na yun ngayon, kagad. Okay? C cannot demand D to give him the 1,000 a month. Okay? May extinguish lang yung obligation to give 1,000 a month kapag ka nag-graduate na si C. Okay? So, take note class, ang resolutory condition, sa umpisa, may obligation ka na. Pero kapag ka nangyari yung resolutory condition, the obligation will be extinguished or will be cut off. It will stop. When the resolutory condition in an obligation to give is fulfilled, the obligation is extinguished and the parties is obliged to return to each other what has been received, including the fruits under the obligation unless otherwise intended by the parties. This is called mutual restitution. For example, class, pahiram ko sa iyo ang laptop ko habang nag-aaral ka pa, pagka-graduate mo, ibalik mo sa akin. Okay? So, may obligation ako to give to you the laptop now because it is demandable at once, but at the end of the resolutory condition, you have to return it. This is called mutual restitution. Unless, tulad nitong example natin sa taas, yung 1,000 a month, nag-promise si D, nabigyan si C ng 1,000 a month, if intended nila yun as allowance ni C, then, kapag ka-graduate ni C, the resolutory condition is fulfilled, there is no need to return the 1,000 pesos. Why? Because the intention of the parties is not to return the thing anymore. Okay? So, classifications ng condition class, may iba-ibang author, may iba-ibang book, ina-classify nila yung conditions as follows. Suspensive resolutory, yung discuss natin kanina. Okay. Sometimes condition is classified as to form. It may be expressed or implied. Express class kapag kaklaro na sinabi ng parties na, ganito ang condition natin. Okay. Implied class if it is merely inferred. Ibig sabihin, inferred is makonclude mo lang if you look at the parties. Tulad nung kunwari ng example na D will give 1,000 to C every month for his schooling until such time that he will graduate. If you look at it, ang implied doon class is it is implied na the 1,000 pesos is intended for as allowance. Okay? So, implied condition. Possible as to possible. Condition may be also classified as so possibility, number 1, possible or impossible. So, the condition may be possible, of course. I will give you something if you will sing, or if you will dance, or that is possible. If you will will go to class. Oh, that is a possible obligation. An impossible obligation class is one that is not capable of fulfillment. For example, I will give you 1,000 if you can hold the moon in your hand. So that is impossible. Impossibility clause may also be something that is legally impossible. Example, I will give you 1,000 if you will smoke marijuana. Okay. Although that is physically possible, but because that is bawal, it is called legally impossible. Okay. So impossibility may either be physically impossible or legally impossible. Legally impossible conditions are those conditions which are prohibited by law. So if an impossible condition is imposed, both the condition and the obligation are void because the debtor knows that his obligation cannot be fulfilled. For example, I will give you 1,000 if you will smoke marijuana. Okay, I know that smoking marijuana is illegal, and I know you will not do it. Even if you will do it, it is still considered legally impossible. Actually, I do not have the intention to give you the 1,000 because I am imposing an impossible condition. Another example, I will give you 1,000 if you can hold the moon in your hand. So I know that that is impossible because actually I do not want to give you the 1,000. That is why I am giving you an impossible condition. So the law says if the obligation has an impossible condition, okay, both the condition and the obligation are void. Okay? Kasi nga ayaw na alam talaga ni debtor na his condition, his obligation cannot be fulfilled. So the promise of giving you 1,000 is void, and the condition that you will hold the moon in your hands is also void. So both the condition and the obligation are void. So conditions may also be classified as the cause of origin, maybe potestative, casual, or mixed. Okay. So this term potestative class very important to class. Please take note of this term kasi balik-balik lang ito sa board exam or any other exams. Kasi potestative is not a common word, a common term, and para pampagulo sa board exam, they usually give problems regarding potestative condition. Okay, take note lang sana sa conditions pa rin tayo. Pag-usapan natin conditions. What is a potestative condition? A condition that depends upon the sole will of one of the contracting parties. Okay, example, I will give you 1,000 if you want. Depende sa iyo. Ikaw lang, isa. Sole will. The sole will of one of the parties. Or, I will give you 1,000 if I want. So, it is dependent on the sole will of me. Okay? So, isa lang ang may will. Dependent sa will. Ang condition is dependent sa will of one of the parties. That is why it's called potestative. So there are two types of potestative condition class where the potestative condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, the condition and the obligation shall be void. Example, I will give you 1,000 if I like. That is void class. Yung condition na if I like and the obligation to give you 1,000 are all void. Why? Because in order not to be liable, the debtor will does not fulfill the condition. Ibig sabihin, walay klaro na. Walay klaro na siyang obligation. Because the debtor, okay, can escape the obligation by not doing the condition that is dependent upon his will. So, take note class. Dalawa klase ang potestative condition class. Potestative on the part of the debtor. Kapag potestative on the part of the debtor, both the obligation and the condition are void. Ano example? I will give you 1,000 if I want. So kahit saan ka na korte mag-adto, magdemanda ka na i-deliver ko sa'yo 1,000, sabihin ko sa korte, ayaw ko eh. That is why this potestative condition on the part of the debtor is void. Paano ang potestative on the part of the creditor? Valid class because halimbawa, I will give you 1,000 if you like. Valid yun. Because if you like, then I am liable. If you do not like, then I will not be liable. Okay? So valid pa rin yun. Yun lang potestative on the part of the debtor ang void. Condition may also be casual. It is dependent upon chance or upon the will of a third person. Ganito. Tayo tayong dalawa sa street. Okay. I will give you 1,000 if may dumaan na taxi. The condition is dependent upon chance. Okay. Kung may magdaan na taxi, then I am liable. Kung wala, di ako liable. Diba? Or, a casual obligation may be, okay, I will give you 1,000 if your neighbor will agree. Dependent upon the sole will of the third person, that is still valid class. It's called a casual condition because your neighbor may agree or not agree. If your neighbor will agree, then I am liable. If your neighbor will not agree, then I will not be liable. So, valid siya. Casual ang tawag ng casual condition. Mixed. Mixed condition is partly by chance and partly upon the will of a third person. Okay. I will give you 1,000 if may dadaang taxi and mag-agree si neighbor. Mixed condition ang tawag dyan. Valid pa rin. As to mode, condition may be classified as positive or negative. If the condition is to perform an act, that is a positive condition. If the condition is not to perform an act, then it's a negative condition. If the condition is not to do an impossible thing, it is regarded that the obligation is rendered valid. Example. The condition is not to do an impossible thing. Okay, I will give you 1,000 if you will not hold the moon in your hand. Okay, the condition is not to do an impossible thing. And a condition that is not to do an impossible thing is very possible. Okay, gagawa ka huwag mong gawin yung imposible. Okay, the condition is not to do an impossible thing. Valid yun, valid. Okay. Actually, the condition is disregarded and the obligation is rendered valid. And it is demandable at once because not to do an impossible thing is very possible and is actually disregarded. Take note of this class, ha? If the condition is not to do an impossible thing, the obligation is valid. Conditions may also be classified as two numbers, conjunctive and disjunctive. Conjunctive if there are several conditions and only one is required to be fulfilled. Disjunctive class if there are several conditions and all must be fulfilled. Conditions may also be divisible or indivisible. Okay, divisible if the condition is susceptible of partial performance. Okay, for example, I will give you 1,000 if you will jump 100 times. Okay, so pwede na siya partial performance. 25 lang muna, then 50, 75, 100. Okay, so divisible siya. Indivisible class is a condition that is not susceptible of partial performance. I will give you 1,000 if you will shout my name. Okay, that is an indivisible condition. Hindi siya pwede partial performance. Isigaw mo letter by letter. Hindi yun ang intention. Okay, so yun ang obligation. After discussing nauna yung pure obligations and then conditional obligations, na dalawang importante doon, yung obligation with a suspensive condition and resolutory condition. This time, ito naman tayo sa obligation with a period. It is one whose effects or consequences are subjected to the expiration or arrival of the period or term. This time naman class, due date. Date ang pinag-usapan dito. Okay. What is a period? Period is a future and a certain event, the arrival of which will give rise to or extinguish an obligation. Take note class ha, yung definition natin ng condition. Condition is a future and uncertain event. A period naman class is future and certain event. Okay, yung condition uncertain, ang period certain. Okay, sigurado mangyari. And then if the period will arrive, then the obligation may either be extinguished or will give rise, or the period will give rise to the obligation. Okay, so a period is a day certain which must necessarily come, although it may not be known when, like the death of a person. Okay, sabi dito sa batas, ang death daw, kahit na hindi siya certain, pero sigurado siya na mangyari, it is still period. It's not a condition. Okay? Parang insurance kas ba? Sabi ng insurance sa'yo, okay, bibigyan ng pera yung beneficiaries mo if namatay ka. Okay? So, di natin alam kung kailan ka namatay, but surely you will die, and the insurer sa insurance will pay the beneficiaries at the time of your death. So the death is not considered a condition but a period, because it will surely come. It is a certain event. Kaya lang yung date, the particular date is uncertain. Period pa rin yun. So there is a disputable presumption in period class. The law says the period is presumed to be established, to have been established for the benefit of both the creditor and the debtor, unless from the tenor of the same or other circumstances it should appear that the period has been established in favor of one or the other. So if the parties are silent, kung kanino ba favorable yung period, it is considered to be favorable to both parties, unless nag-agree sila na in favor of the debtor or in favor of the creditor. The following is deemed to be with a period when his means permit him to do so. Okay, halimbawa, nag-utang ko sa'yo 1,000. Bayarin ko lang pag may pera na ako. Ibig sabihin yan. Yan ang ibig sabihin yan. When his means permit me to do so. Okay? Kahit hindi pa niya alam kung kailan siya magkapera, but it is still considered a period, not a condition. I will pay you little by little is considered a period, not a condition. Sabi ng batas. As soon as possible, I will pay you as soon as possible. It is a period, not a condition. I will pay you from time to time. It is a period, not a condition. At any time I have the money is considered a period and not a condition. I will pay you in partial payments is considered a period. Okay. So aside sa death class, kaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are considered period even if hindi pa alam ang fixed date. Okay. At 7 day. When he is in a position to pay, is also considered a period. So if naka-encounter kayo ng problem sa board exam na may ganun, it is considered a period and not a condition. So kapag hindi siya nagbayad, you can go to court. Sabi niya, I will pay you when my means permit me to do so, or I will pay you little by little, or I will pay you if I have the money, or I will pay you in partial payments. Tapos hindi siya nagbayad. Hindi pa rin siya nagbayad. Then you can go to court and ask the court to fix the period. Okay. The court has also the power to fix in cases where the period depends upon the sole will of the debtor. Potestative pa rin to. Take note class ha. Yung potestative kanina, potestative condition yun. Condition. Potestative condition on the part of the debtor is not valid. Pero ito class, ang ginag-usapan natin dito, hindi na condition kundi period. Okay? Ang sabi ng batas class, if ang period is potestative, dependent upon the sole will of the debtor. Okay? May utang, tapos sabi niya, bayaran ko lang kapag gusto ko na. Okay? Ang sole will doon class is hindi ang pagbayad, kundi yung time. Kaya sabi ng batas, valid pa rin yan. Here, the obligation is not affected, although the period depends upon the sole will of the debtor. It is only the performance with respect to time that is left to the will of the debtor. So, yung time lang ang nasa sole will of the debtor kasi sa period. So, do not confuse yourself if it is dependent upon the sole will of the debtor. Okay? Kapag ang condition dependent upon the sole will of the debtor, then ang condition and an obligation void. Pero if the period naman is dependent upon the sole will of the debtor, valid pa rin yung class. Kasi yung time lang naman nasa sole will niya, hindi yung obligation. Yan ang sabi ng batas. So, if you encounter a problem na may sinabing dependent upon the sole will of the debtor, you look if ang pinag-uusapan is condition or period. Okay? If the period is dependent upon the sole will of the creditor, mas lalong valid. Kasi si creditor ang mag-decide kung kailan yung time. Pwede yun. Ang hindi lang pwede class is yung condition so dependent upon the sole will of the debtor. It is also called potestative on the part of the potestative condition on the part of the debtor. Yun ang hindi valid. Yung kanina, hindi ito. So, meron tayong batas class, yung Administrative Code of 1987. Sabi doon, ang year daw is composed of 12 months. Kaya alam naman natin yan, pero nakasulat pa rin yan sa batas na 12 months daw ang 1 year. Kaya ang month daw, kapag hindi sinabi kung anong specific na month, ibig sabihin ng month, 30 days. Okay? For example, I will give you the thing in a month. Ibig sabihin ng 30 days. Hindi niya sinabi January, February. Basta sinabi niya lang month, ibig sabihin ng 30 days. Okay. Pag sinabi niya in a day, it means 24 hours. And night is the time from sunset to sunrise. Sunset to sunrise kasi hindi sunset to sundown kasi sunset o sundown pareho na. May estudyante ako kasi dati. Sir, night is from sunset to sundown. Parehas lang yan, sunset at saka sundown. So, night is from sunset, paglubog ng araw, hanggang pag sunrise. Two principal kinds of period, yung pinag-usapan natin. Ito naman iba na pala ito. Kung may suspensive condition class, pero hindi suspensive period. Or XDA. Or XDI. Some will pronounce this as XDI. Pero the proper is XDA. Or resolutory period or INDIM. Day kasi yan class day. So, kung may resolutory condition, meron din resolutory period. So, pareha lang sila class. Sa obligation with a suspensive period, okay, hindi ka pa liable until such time dumating yung date na pinag-usapan ninyo. the period. Sa resolutory period naman, liable ka na now until the date na pinag-usapan ninyo. So, parang pareho lang din siya ng condition. Kaya lang, dito, ang pinag-usapan, period or day. Kaya XDA at NDM. Kumukay. So, suspensive period, the obligation begins only from the day certain upon the arrival of the period. So, period. Para pa rin siyang suspensive condition class, kaya lang ito, date ang pinag-usapan natin, period. Example, I will pay you 15 days from today. So, I will not pay you from now until hindi pa mangyari yung 15 days. Hindi pa dadating yung ka-15th day. During the pendency of the suspensive period, the same rules are applied sa specific thing. Okay? Yung rule natin sa pendency ng suspensive condition class, if there is in case of loss, deterioration, and improvement, is applicable pa rin sa if the condition is a suspensive condition, if the obligation is within suspensive period. Okay? Yung loss, deterioration, if may fault ng debtor, damages. Kung wala naman, is not liable. Okay? And an obligation to give, the debtor can recover what has been paid by mistake. Pareho pa rin yun. Solution DBT. Akala mo, dumating na yung due date, wala pa pala, nabigay mo na, pwede yung power-bawin. Resolutory period or NDM. The obligation is valid up to the day certain and terminates upon the arrival of the period. Pares lang isa sa resolutory condition class. Kaya lang this one, period ang pinag-usapan. Here, the obligation is demandable at once. So, tatlo na. So, pag tinanong ka sa board exam, what are the obligations that are demandable at once? Tatlo na yun. Number 1, personal, pure obligation. Number 2, obligation subject to a resolutory condition. Number 3, obligation subject to a resolutory period. Tatlo na yung demandable at once. Now, example ng resolutory period, I will give you financial support until you die. Oh, demandable at once. Ngayon, pwede mo na i-demand. Because namatay ka na, hindi mo na ma-demand. Patay ka na yun. So, demandable at once. Periods may also be classified as follows. Some authors will also classify this period as follows. Ito. Suspensive and resolutory, as discussed. Sometimes the period is also classified as two source, legal period, conventional, or judicial. Legal period class if it is imposed by law, conventional or voluntary if it is agreed by the parties, judicial if it is fixed by the court. Okay. Sometimes period may also be classified as to definiteness, definite period, number 1, number 2, and definite period. Definite period class if it is fixed, ang date, klaro, it is known. Ang indefinite period class is not known, pero it will surely come like death. Okay? So, indefinite period ang death. Alam natin na mangyari, pero hindi natin alam kailan. So, Article 1198, the debtor shall lose every right to make use of the period. Number 1, when, after the obligation has been contracted, he becomes insolvent until he gives a guarantee or security for that. Insolvent class, ibig sabihin, he has more liabilities than asset. So, kapag meron siyang utang na may period when to pay, tapos naging insolvent siya, sabi ng batas, the creditor can immediately demand payment. Huwag na hintayin na mapurdoy. Kahit na wala pa yung due date. Unless, magbigay siya ng guarantee or security na pambayad ng utang. Okay, like prenda. Number 2, when the debtor does not furnish to the creditor the guarantees or securities he has promised. Okay, example, umutang siya, prenda niya ang sasakyan niya. Tapos yung utang, babayaran niya December 31, 2020. Nung nakuha niya ng pera, hindi niya gi-deliver yung car. The law says the creditor can now collect the utang kasi hindi binigay ni creditor yung prenda niya. Number 3, when by his own acts, he has impaired said guarantees or securities after their establishment, and then through a fortuitous event, they disappear unless he immediately gives a new ones equally satisfactory. For example, plus, utang ang debtor, nagprenda siya ng kotse. Okay, payable on the utang is payable on December 31, 2020. Pero di pa dumating December 31, 2020. Okay, nasira niya yung sasakyan o nasunog. Okay? Or nagkaroon ng fortuitous event na wala. So wala nang security, wala nang guarantee. Kahit hindi pa due date, the credit according to law, the creditor can now collect without waiting for December 31 unless the debtor will give a new security or guarantee. Number 4, when the debtor violates any undertaking in consideration of which the creditor agreed to the period. So kapag ka nag-violate ng mga promises, okay, na ang debtor, the creditor can now collect without waiting for the due date. Number 5, when the debtor attempts to abscond. Abscond kasi ibig sabihin sibat. Okay, kahit na hindi pa due date, tapos magsibat na ang debtor, huwag mo lang hintayin ang due date. You can collect now habang nandyan pa siya. In these cases, the period is disregarded and the obligation will be demandable at once. So, 4 na. Apat na yan. Pure obligation. What are obligations that are demandable at once? Number 1, pure obligation. Number 2, obligation subject to resolutory condition. Number 3, obligation subject to resolutory period. Number 4, itong mga ito. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ito yung pang-apat. Actually, kung idagdag nito doon, 8 na eh. 5 kasi ito eh. So, the debtor attempts to abscond. The obligation is demandable at once.